She had been waiting outside the command tent for over 3 hours. No orders, no radio call, just rain collecting at her boots while others came and went, exchanging maps and mission files without ever looking in her direction. Her name had been pulled from the recon rotation at the last minute. No explanation. Then someone new stepped out of the wire, a quiet arrival, not announced over the net, and everything changed. What followed didn't make the after-action report, but it did shift the course of the op, and left half the battalion asking the same question by nightfall: who was watching that ridgeline? From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. Just after sunrise. Forward. Operating base. Ember Ridge looked like a half-drowned machine. Rain sheeted down the jungle slope and poured over the camo netting strung between the antenna masts. Water pooled in the red clay ruts between tents, rising ankle-deep along the gravel pathways. The comms shack, built from salvaged shipping panels, hissed with humidity. Inside, Mara sat alone. She wore marine tactical gear soaked through at the shoulders and sleeves, her ash-brown hair pulled into a single braid that had long since darkened to near black. Drops clung to her collar. Her sleeves were rolled to the forearm in clean cuffs, despite the dripping edges. Her gloved hands moved slowly across a buckled field console, fingers damp but sure. The interior smelled like burnt solder, recycled sweat, and wet canvas. A low-fidelity audio loop hummed over the left channel. She adjusted it with a small twist of the dial and leaned closer, listening not for signal, but for interference. In the background, the base stirred to life. Boots squelched outside. Someone kicked a canister. Distant helicopter blades spooled up with that signature thrum you felt in your teeth before it reached your ears. No one came in. On the desk beside her, a waterproof notebook lay open to a page marked with time blocks and grid coordinates. She'd labeled the last 3 entries manually: 72 kilo, disruption tone, suppressed waveform, 9 seconds apart. She made no announcement, no warning, just wrote it down. Behind her, the plastic flaps rustled. A corporal stuck his head in long enough to glance at the monitor and mutter, "Ghost loop still running her weather drama." He was gone before she turned. Another voice chuckled outside. "Better update the static diary." Mara didn't respond. Her posture never shifted. She pressed the headset tighter against one ear and adjusted the analog frequency splitter she'd taped to the side of the panel 2 nights ago. Rain distorted every sound. That was the first thing people got wrong. They thought static was just noise. But to her, rain was rhythm. When it hit vinyl, it pinged. When it hit foliage, it rustled. When it hit skin, it slapped and disappeared. What she was hearing now didn't fit. The grid sector was near the southern ravine. That morning's drone sweep had reported thermal scatter. No movement. Command had marked the area null and pulled the team assigned to check it. Lieutenant Thomas had shrugged and called it a phantom loop. "You're reading rain scatter," he told her without looking up from his tablet. "That grid's cold. Stand down." She had nodded once. No argument. He had not asked what she had logged. Neither had the sergeant standing beside him, chewing on a protein bar like it was more urgent than the last extraction brief. Across the compound, a fire team returned from patrol. Their boots tracked red clay across the steel decking as they dumped wet gear into bins. One of them called out to her through the open flap. "Rain watch? You got ghosts in the system again." She glanced over, met his eyes for just a second, and said nothing. He smirked and turned away. There was no seat for her in the main comms loop. Her role was listed as atmospheric analyst, a catch-all term used to park junior Marines in support stations. She didn't argue. She never had. She just kept listening. The radio hissed again, subharmonic at first, then a wet pop. "Grid 72 kilo." She clicked off the loop and logged the time by hand. No one behind the glass walls would see that page. Her logs weren't synced to ops. They said her channel wasn't priority. Outside, the downpour intensified. She pulled her poncho hood over her braid and stepped out. boots slipping briefly on the wet mat before finding traction. A pair of Marines passed her near the fueling station, their faces obscured by fogged-up goggles. One elbowed the other and said something she didn't catch. She didn't stop walking. By the time she reached the storage tent, the floodlights had switched off for daylight hours. The light was weak and yellow, filtered through a sky smeared with cloud. Her gear locker was at the back, unmarked. Inside was her standard headset, a sidearm she never wore, and her field recorder, an old analog model with cracked edges and a waterproof wrap secured by 3 layers of dull gray tape. She checked the charge, flicked the gauge, still full. When she turned, she caught the tail end of a conversation near the tent entrance. "She's still logging that loop," one of the operators said. "Let her," another replied. "Keeps her out of the way." Mara clipped the recorder to her belt and walked past them without acknowledgement. Her boots were soaked, but she didn't adjust her gait. She moved with calm precision, as though every footfall had been rehearsed. At the main command board, names scrolled across a screen in green: Team Viper, Team Echo, all recalled. The words next to Grid 72 Kilo read, "No contact. Sweep closed." The loop frequency flickered behind her. No one watched it. She removed her issued headset and laid it on the table beside her logs. The sergeant glanced at it, then at her. "You're good," he said. "Get some rack time." Mara nodded again. Quiet. Always quiet. She walked back to the barracks through standing water that soaked the hem of her pants and chilled her ankles. The air carried the weight of rot and ozone. Somewhere above the canopy, a bird cried out once, then fell silent. Inside her bunk, she peeled off the outer layer of gear and laid her waterproof journal flat on her cot. The ink held. She ran her thumb along the margin, then reached for the recorder. She placed it beside the journal, pressed play, and let the loop run through the last 20 minutes. Drip, drip, pause, drip, delay, then the sound again. A wet impact, without echo. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She listened. And outside, the rain kept falling. The lights at the forward base dimmed just after 2200 hours. Inside the sleeping tents, warm air pooled beneath the canvas roofs, thick with the scent of wet gear and fatigue. From a distance, the place looked like a sealed pocket of comfort lights, doused, bodies still, breathing slow under dry blankets. Mara moved in silence along the outer slope, her boots sinking into the rain-heavy soil. She wore her tactical jacket zipped to the throat, hood pulled low, her ash-brown braid tucked neatly under the collar. The rain fell steady now, no longer driven by wind, just a constant vertical sheet that blurred the outlines of trees and glistened on every leaf it touched. She had left her bunk without a word. Her name wasn't on the roster. Her loop had been shut. But she carried her notebook in the front panel of her vest, and the analog splitter coiled like wire braid in her left hand. Water ran off the brim of her hood and soaked into her sleeves. She didn't wipe it away. The trail to the decommissioned relay box twisted down through the edge of the slope where the jungle pressed in closer. No patrols swept that far at night. Too remote. Too wet. The mud here wasn't red like the rest of the camp. It was gray and soft, with just enough grit to coat her boot soles, but not enough to hold a footprint. The canopy above her shifted only slightly, leaves heavy with rain, too drenched to sway. She crouched low beneath a thick camo tarp she had strung earlier that week between 2 weathered branches. It was invisible from above and muffled the rain just enough for her to hear beneath it. The relay box sat 6 inches off the ground, half buried in leaf sludge, its casing rusted, its power long gone. But Mara had no need for live feed. She popped the side latch, wiped the terminal edge clean with her glove, and clicked the patch wire into place. Static filled the channel, first wet and uneven, then the tone leveled. She tuned the signal dial with her thumb until the floor noise settled into a layered hum. Rain on water, rain on canvas, rain on everything. Her knees pressed into wet soil, her elbow anchored against a rock slick with moss, One gloved hand cradled the recorder. The other turned the page of her waterproof journal. 23:30. First anomaly gap in Frog Song. Brief but full. A sudden, collective silence. She wrote the time and marked a short dash. 10 minutes later, a ripple cut across the low register. Not thunder, not echo. She slowed her breath, tilting her head. Then it came. One splash. Mid-sized. Displacement. Not from above, no drop. Lateral. As if something moved through pooled water carefully. Not stepping, but sliding. Then silence again. No follow-up, no branch snap, no correction. She reached for her pencil, logged it, and circled the mark twice. The loop continued. She did not call it in. At 0600, the drizzle hadn't stopped. It had only changed character, less downpour, more saturation, the kind of rain that settled into seams and cuffs, that blurred the lines between fabric and skin. Inside the comms tent, Mara stood quietly while her headset was lifted from the hook on her collar. A staff sergeant clipped it to a charging rack without looking at her. "You're off rotation," he said. "Loops closed. Nothing to log today." She didn't argue. Her boots made no sound against the damp mat as she turned and walked out. In the mess tent, the heaters pushed recycled air through ceiling vents. Steam rose from trays of rehydrated oatmeal and packets of instant coffee. Mara sat alone near the rear exit on a folding stool, tray balanced on her knee, eyes on the dirt-smeared window. She heard a voice behind her. "Static ghost in the wild," someone muttered. Another replied, "Clipboard Marine returns." Neither looked her way. The jokes were habitual now, not cruel, just idle. She finished eating, returned her tray, and stepped back out into the fog. Her bunk was warm and still when she opened the flap. She didn't remove her gear. She reached for her journal, laid it flat on her cot, and copied 3 pages by hand. Time blocks, terrain tags, and echo notations, each written twice. She sealed one copy into a plastic envelope and tucked it beneath the liner in her chest rig. Her fingers moved without hesitation. She reached into her side pouch, pulled her field recorder from its wrap, and peeled back the wet tape. She rewound the housing with fresh plastic and checked the charge with a flick test. The gauge blinked once, then held steady. She clicked it off again and reclipped it to her harness. At 0800, Mara stepped out into the mist. The Southern Ridge Trail was mostly forgotten, used once during site setup, then left to overgrowth. Branches hung low, dripping water in steady rhythm onto her shoulders. Her boots slid once on a slope of clay but found purchase again without pause. The air smelled of wet bark and iron soil. Near grid 72 kilo, she reached the relay box. It sat half sunk in the embankment, one corner rusted through, the casing streaked with algae. She knelt beside it, gloves already damp, and unlatched the corroded seal. Inside, the wiring was still intact but frayed at the ends. She unhooked the patch cable from her vest and stripped back a section of shielding with her thumbnail. She twisted the exposed wire tight and threaded it into the old port, securing it with the notch from her multi-tool. The relay sparked faintly, no power, but enough contact to carry signal. Mara clipped the receiver to her belt and slipped her journal into her lap. The noise began again, low and grainy, rain on foliage, background static. She wrote the new timestamp. Then she waited and listened. The rain never fully stopped. It softened, turned lighter, more deliberate. No longer a storm, but a skin of sound that touched everything. From her position just above the ravine, Mara lay prone beneath a stretch of broadleaf foliage, her body wrapped in camo fabric slick with moisture. The edge of her hood pressed against the back of her braid, damp but tight. Mud lined the side of her cheek and shoulder, cool against the heat of her skin. Grid 72 kilos stretched out below her, not in visibility, but in memory. The tree line was a blur of vertical trunks, low scrub, and thick vines tangled around unseen slopes. Mist hugged the floor of the jungle, curling upward like steam over water. From here, no lines of sight existed, only rhythm. She had been there since 0800. Her waterproof journal lay open beneath her chest, pressed flat to the dirt. Her knees were anchored against a buried root. Her left hand held the receiver. Her right hand held a pencil, motionless, waiting. The loop she'd tapped into ran faint and degraded, but it was clean enough for what she needed. The echoes came in layers, raindrops on leaves, water falling into standing puddles, distant branches shifting under the weight of moisture. She'd learned not to listen for what was added, but for what went missing. At 0917, the frog stopped. It wasn't dramatic, no sharp cutoff, just a gentle thinning of sound like a breath being held. She noted the timestamp, underlined it once, and lifted her head half an inch to listen harder. No birds, no flutter. The rain itself shifted pitch, falling on different surfaces. For 10 seconds, the area below her moved in silence. Then a new sound came. It wasn't movement exactly. It was the lack of echo in a specific pattern. She heard the water land, strike, and fail to bounce. That meant something had absorbed it, a surface warm, possibly curved, blocking its natural scatter. She traced her finger along the page, sketching the echo signature like a slope. At 0942, the brush pressure changed. Not snapped, not disturbed, just compressed. She didn't move. She didn't raise her scope or try to look. That wasn't the point. Her eyes would give her nothing here. Sound was her only map, and the map was forming. She tracked the distortion across a contour she remembered from the elevation sketch. The ravine bent north by northwest, then dropped into a low pool zone that should have been flooded by now. But something had crossed it. Not at speed, not with aggression. The echo gap had been patient, controlled. That was training. Mara adjusted the gain slightly, not enough to cause a spike. She let the low tone ride steady while she matched her earlier annotations. Each disruption came in sequence, 7 to 10 minutes apart, always preceded by environmental stillness. This wasn't a drift, it was a track. The HVT hadn't escaped the border. He was here, moving slow, likely injured, maybe alone. At 10:23, Mara pressed the record tab on her receiver and kept it running for 3 minutes. In that window, she caught 2 minor echoes, a shallow shift of footing on clay, followed by what might have been a hand against wet bark. She drew a second line on the map. 2 points, 500 meters apart, direction consistent. She marked the midpoint with a circle. The space smelled of wet moss and old vines. Somewhere nearby, a beetle scuttled beneath a fern. The canopy above her trembled once as a light breeze rolled through, stirring the water clinging to every leaf. The rustling lasted 2 seconds, then settled. She adjusted her position by 1 elbow's width, careful not to press too hard into the mud. The journal never left her side. The recorder stayed running. By 1100, she had 13 data points. None would pass as visual confirmation. None would satisfy a drone operator or command chief. But she wasn't logging for them. She was drawing a body through the fog. A low growl of thunder drifted across the ridge. She watched the sound roll past her position, bending slightly as it met the tree line. She logged the delay. That gave her a reference point for distance. She checked the elevation line against her drawn path. The next move would either force the subject to climb unlikely or flatten out toward the edge of a runoff bed. That's where she would mark. She drew the symbol for probable position. Then she clicked her receiver to the secondary band. No encryption, no official frequency. The backup relay used for short-term diagnostics. It hadn't been active in over a week. She lifted the mic and spoke once. Request quiet element. Confirm ridge return at 72 kilo. 1 echo trace present. Target trail persistent. Coordinates follow. Her voice was calm. No inflection. No urgency. She gave the grid, the time, the signature. Then she cut the line. No reply came. None was expected. She clipped the mic back to her vest and wiped her pencil tip against the cuff of her glove. The journal closed with a soft flex of fabric. She lowered her head back into the mud and waited. Not for praise, not for contact, only for the next silence. The call passed unnoticed across the main command net. Grid 72 kilo had been closed in the morning briefs. No new taskings, no thermal contacts, no satellite cue. As far as the operations board was concerned, the HVT was long gone, or never there. The jungle had returned to noise, and the team had moved on. But, in the upper relay deck, shielded behind aluminum siding and patched cables that whined in the wet air, a senior comms operator named Colin paused mid-check when the signal hit a dead diagnostics band. Not urgent, not flagged, just clean. The voice was low and steady. The grid was exact. The cadence was not rehearsed. He looked at the empty field on the monitor. No mission tag, no source signature. The call shouldn't exist. Colin stared for another second, then keyed into the secondary ground channel, highlighted a fire team standing by for weather recon, and issued a soft retask order. No alerts, no log entry. The request was filed under field assessment. Then he deleted the task from his terminal. At 14:30 hours, the recon team callsign Razor stepped out into the jungle with no briefing, just coordinates. 3 Marines, lean and rain-soaked, moved single file along the ravine slope. The first carried a folded litter. The second wore an optics visor low over her brow. The third had a tethered pack drone tucked to his chest. Their boots made almost no sound on the wet floor. Each step angled inward for balance. The drizzle had softened to mist. Ferns bent under the light touch of gear, then bounced back, undisturbed. Grid match confirmed. The lead said into his throat mic, "Elevation 25, moving west flank, no air cover." They moved by reflex, every sweep and glance done without verbal coordination. It was the kind of motion that came from weeks of repetition, not orders. They had no reason to question the grid, only to see. The canopy stretched wide, its top layer broken only by fog light filtering through. Below, the ravine dropped into a basin so narrow it barely registered on elevation models. It wasn't a place anyone expected to matter. But at 14:51, it did. "Hold," came from the left. The Marine with the optics visor froze. Her hand went up. The team dropped into a crouch. Beneath a split in the foliage, a human figure lay in the mud, face turned to the slope, one arm tucked under the chest. No weapon visible, no gear that looked recent. The outline was still. The team edged forward. Target visual, single body, no motion. Running scan now. The scanner flickered once, then locked. HVT confirmed. Code matches primary. Pulse is low. Signs of exposure. Breathing shallow. They moved in close. No commands shouted. No signals flared. One of them placed a stabilizer band over the man's chest. Another checked limbs for injury. The HVT blinked, unfocused, too weak to lift his head. Subject conscious, minimal resistance. The drone remained grounded. There was no threat perimeter. Nothing stirred. Extraction approved. We'll package now. Far above, lying still beneath a curtain of thick vines, Mara watched. Her body hadn't moved since 1300. Her braid was plastered against her back, water pooling at her elbows. She kept one hand braced on the journal lying open in front of her. The last mark on the sketch map matched the shallow ridge directly below. She said nothing. She watched as the team lifted the subject onto the stretcher. The HVT let out a low groan as his shoulder shifted. One Marine adjusted the angle, nodding once. The others tightened the carry loops and rechecked balance. They started up the incline toward the landing point with measured steps. Mara stayed where she was. She could see the weight in their shoulders, the discipline in their spacing. The HVT was breathing. That was enough. They would get him out. Their formation adjusted slightly as they entered the scrub, shifting left to avoid a runoff trench. One of them paused briefly to scan upward. They didn't see her. She was too deep in shadow, flattened against the slope. Her gear blended into mud and bark. The edge of her hood cast a line across her cheek. The loop receiver at her side still played faint white noise. She reached to turn it off. The sound vanished. The frogs began again. She looked back down at the map. The curved path she had sketched an hour earlier held every step of the subject's movement. The angle was exact. The final marker circle with 2 lines sat in the middle of the basin the team had just cleared. She folded the paper once, tight and slow. There was no celebration, no breath of victory, just the soft creak of vinyl as she adjusted her elbow and slid the journal back into her rig. Down below, the figures moved behind a curtain of leaves, their voices clipped and distant. She could hear the extraction chopper spooling up beyond the ridge. The jungle had opened just long enough to let them pass through. Then it closed again. Mara rolled to her side, checked the recorder for damage, then powered it down. Her gloves left streaks of brown on the casing. Her forearms were scraped from hours of stillness. A line of grit had settled across her temple. She reached up, wiped it once, and let her hand fall. The air around her vibrated with motion, but none of it was hers. She would not be seen, not here, not by them. They would return to the base. The HVT would be processed. The map would remain folded in her vest. No one would ask where the grid came from. No one would know who pointed them here. But she would. She pressed her palm into the soft soil, shifted her weight, and began to move 1 inch at a time back uphill. Rain whispered through the trees above. She let it fall. By 1700 hours. The command tent at Ember Ridge was running at half voice. The recon team had returned with the HVT secured, sedated, and undergoing a medical intake. No shots fired. No resistance. The subject had been found curled in the basin of 72 kilo, precisely where the grid marker had landed. That was the problem, because no one had assigned 72 kilo. The logistics officer, a tall man with a lean build and a clipped tone, stood in front of the big screen with a line of static paused at the 15-minute mark. His hand hovered over the scrub wheel. On the feed behind him, the recon team was visible in blurred body cam footage, moving through heavy brush toward the prone figure. Across the tent, 2 chairs creaked as staff leaned forward. One of the junior analysts tapped at her tablet, frowning. "There's no tasking record for that zone," she said quietly. "No briefing, no drone queue. It wasn't on the cleared pathing sheet." The air was damp, heavy with cordite and sweat from returning gear. The command lights hummed faintly. Someone cracked the seal on a ration bar but didn't need it. "Play the call log again," said a voice near the terminal. She pulled up the waveform archive, ran it back 10 seconds, then let it roll. The speaker was quiet, even, and clipped by channel static. The words emerged clean despite the degradation. "Ridge listen. Grid 72 kilo. Confirmed contact. Coordinates follow." The tent was silent. The logistics officer looked up. "Who's Ridge listen?" The analyst didn't answer immediately. She ran a search. Her mouth opened slightly when the screen blinked. "It's not an assigned call sign, not registered." The man at the far console cleared his throat. "It's her. Mara." He didn't have to say the rest. The rain picked up outside. Soft, but unrelenting. A few personnel near the perimeter tent stepped inside, stamping boots free of mud. Inside, no one moved. Another voice, quieter now, added, "She was pulled off rotation this morning. She wasn't even cleared for that band." She wasn't cleared for any band. The analyst looked back at the log. The coordinates matched the capture point down to 1 meter. The call had gone out 3 hours before Razor Team moved. No one spoke for a full 5 seconds. "Was this logged?" asked the logistics officer. "No," someone answered. "It was heard by Colin. He rerouted Razor under field code. Didn't tag it." The feed kept playing. The recon team calling in the biometric match. The HVT's face pressed into mud. Confirmation, wrap, extraction, all of it logged, approved, and folded into the sitrep based on a signal that wasn't supposed to exist. Outside the tent, the rotor wash of an inbound bird cut across the compound. Supplies, maybe medevac, the kind of movement that made noise without consequence. Inside the comm shack on the north end of base, Mara sat cross-legged on the floor, boots off, socks lined across a vent to dry. Her gear was still strapped down, buckles wet, cloth dark from mud. The loop console was powered down beside her. She had not rejoined the network. A coil of fresh tape sat beside her notebook, unused. Her braid had started to dry but hung limp against her shoulder. The window above her cot was fogged at the corners, water tracing small arcs across the glass. She took the recorder from her vest, wiped it clean, and placed it on the cot. For a long moment, she did nothing. Then she pressed play. The low whine of background static filled the small space. Then came her voice, distant and smooth, shaped by long habit and not by nerves. Ridge, listen. Grid 72 kilo. Confirmed contact. She let the recording run. No pride crossed her face, no tension eased. When it finished, she clicked it off, rewound it, then set it down again. From the corner of the shack, the small desk lamp flickered once. She reached for her notebook, opened it to the last page, and used the edge of her sleeve to blot a corner where water had warped the margin. Nothing had been asked of her since returning. No one had come to find her. The base had reacted, not in praise or reprimand, but with a hollow pause. She knew the signs. Recognition took time to surface, and sometimes it never did. But facts didn't wait for permission. Across the base, the tent housing command began to reset its screens. Maps updated, routes adjusted. The next ops brief would include 72 kilo now, printed and circled in red, flagged for follow-up. They would cite the successful capture, cite the confirmed intel. But no one would attach a name to the moment that made it happen. No one except the team that had walked the path and found the truth waiting where it wasn't supposed to be. Mara folded her journal closed, brushed a flake of dried mud from her wrist, and leaned back against the cot frame. Outside, the rain fell steady. Inside, the recorder clicked softly back into place. She did not smile. She did not frown. She had heard the moment land, and that was enough. She never asked for recognition. She never raised her voice or stepped into the spotlight. But through patience, precision, and an unshakable sense of duty, she changed the course of a mission no one believed she should be part of. While others dismissed her, she listened. While the system looked past her, she stayed steady. And in the end, it was her quiet clarity that led them home. This is the kind of strength that rarely makes headlines, the kind found not in medals or ceremony, but in the spaces between orders, in the choices made when no one is watching. What did this story bring up for you? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this speak to you, follow along for more quiet, powerful moments from those who serve without needing to be seen.